Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, from an Auckland where it really cannot quite make its mind up what kind of weather it wants to have. We've had rain, we've had sunshine, we've had wind. We haven't had hail or snow yet, but I'm sure that is just an oversight. In my last video, I talked a little bit about compulsory gear, the things that you must have according to the race rules. Today, we're going to talk about things that, while they're not compulsory, they're things that will hopefully make your day on the trail a little bit easier, a little bit more pleasant, or maybe de-risk some of the things that could go wrong. Before we get into talking about the specific items, which we've got here, it's probably worth mentioning the golden rule of racing. Now, the golden rule simply says that you should not do on race day anything that you have not done, preferably multiple times during training, simply because the risk is just too great. Let's talk about these items and my experience of them. Now, please note your experience may vary and other people may also have things to contribute, so I would urge them to comment in the chat or on the Facebook post that I'll put on Wild Things New Zealand and on the Tarawera Ultramarathon page. A couple of things that are mentioned in the mandatory gear but are listed as optional. So one, it's a very good idea to have a plastic cup. This is a cheap plastic fold-up cup that I got from Ultimate Direction. The aid stations at Tarawera are cupless, so if you rock up wanting to have a glass of ginger ale or flat coke or something like that, you will need something like this. Otherwise, the aid station volunteers will have to pour it into your mouth or something like that. So that is very much in the yes pile. Having a phone is a good idea. You can take photos, you can call the race authorities if there's a problem. In the extremely unlikely event that you need to call the emergency services, you've got that with you. The trail is not always kind to electronic equipment, so it's probably worthwhile having some kind of cover for it. You can either use just a Ziploc bag, or if you're going to be out there for a long time, you might want to have a cover like this if you're going to use it a lot. That's actually compulsory for the miler, but is optional for the 102k. But yeah, for me, in the yes pile. Other things, hats. Depending on the weather, it can be really worthwhile having something like a sun visor to keep the sun off, but it still allows airflow over your head, so it's not a bad thing. So maybe a trucker cap. That's what kind of is my go-to. I will have this with me at all times. I will tend only to wear it if it's either raining, because the visor keeps the rain off my glasses, or if it's extremely hot. And a thing you can do with this or a bucket hat, which I'll talk about in a second, is you can dump it in a bucket of iced water at the aid stations and then put it on your head, and it'll give you a few kilometres of relief, so it's worthwhile having. Or for Jim Walmsley fans among us, a bucket hat. If you know, you know. Definitely in the yes pile. Sunglasses, kind of a maybe. I very often have them with me, but I can't wear them for very long at a time because they make me feel a bit drowsy and weird. I've got a set that can kind of go over my glasses, and even then it make me feel a little bit odd. So for me, that's probably in the maybe pile. It's kind of worthwhile maybe having, but I wouldn't hang my hat on absolutely having them. Buff, wrap it around your wrist, use it to wipe sweat off. If it's a cold day, over your head is a hood or around your neck to give you a little bit of extra warmth. Weighs nothing, it's just useful to have, definitely in the yes pile for me. Rubbish bag. Tarawera and other races, quite rightly, in my view, have rules about littering, so it's worthwhile having a rubbish bag or a Ziploc bag or a dog poop bag like this one is, just to put your rubbish into, so you can make sure you don't leave anything on the trails you shouldn't. That includes, incidentally, fruit peels and things like that, because that's food for non-native species like rats that are bad for native birds. So take everything away from the trail that you brought onto it. Rubbish bag, definitely in the yes pile. AntiChafe. So if you're running the 102k, or for that matter the 50 or the 100 mile, you're going to get hot and sweaty and you might end up chafing. So I use a couple of things. I use little squares of K-tape. Stays on up to 24 hours through rain, mud, sweat, the whole 9 yards. On my groin, perineum, and on the creases at the inside of my thighs, I use Vaseline, so 2-finger dip up. I will tend to put more on maybe every 50 or 60 kilometres. So at Tarawera, that means from the start to about outlet aid station. And I'll put some of that in my drop bag, which I'll talk about for another day. Vaseline works for me. There's a number of other options like Tri-Slide Squirrel's Nut Butter. There's lots of good options out there. So very definitely in the must-have pile. Poles. This is kind of a personal choice, very much. I'll just pull these out. I have a pair of Lecky Micro Vario Trail poles, but there are others, and they split up into 3 segments, and they've got these little kind of semi-gloves that go on your wrist and click in. They're very, very good. Personally, at Tarawera, for me, these are a no. Simply because I do not find Tarawera 102k or the mile long enough or relentless enough for the fact that I might need poles. That is a personal choice, and your mileage may vary. There is, however, one circumstance where I might end up using poles, and that is if it's an extremely wet day. Every few years at Tarawera, it absolutely tips down. The trail becomes a complete quagmire, whereas normally if it's a bit rainy, it drains fairly well. And the climb up out of Okataina is a nightmare to do, in which case it's probably worth having poles. Otherwise, it's probably in the no bucket for me, but I will take them along just in case we end up with a very wet day. Final kind of thing, I have a little care parcel like this, and this has just got some things in it that are there to mitigate risk or help you along on the day. It weighs about somewhere between 50 and 100 grams. It takes up very, very little volume. I have this in nearly every single thing I do, just because it's so useful. So let's start with, I have some kitchen roll, which I generally use as toilet paper. Some days you may have to go and poop while you're out on the trail. It's worthwhile having this. Shitting in the woods is a subject for a whole other podcast or YouTube video. So I would also expect to, having used this, to pack it out and not leave it there. So we'll not go into details on that, but you definitely want to have some kind of toilet paper there in case you're caught short between aid stations. In a similar sort of vein, hand sanitizer, really great stuff. Sunscreen. So I have a little sachet of sunscreen. For people not from New Zealand or who aren't familiar with New Zealand, the sun here in the summer is absolutely ferocious. It will burn you incredibly quickly, and it will give a strength and depth of burn that is horrifying. I really would wear factor 50 or higher sunblock, and I'd have some extra to reapply if you start to get nervous about it sweating off while you're out on the trail. So I've got a few sachets of that. Blisters. Up until recently, I very really got blisters, but I've got some kit for those now, having suffered them in a couple of things recently. I have some squares of or larger pieces of K-tape, which can just cover things up. If you think you're getting a hot spot, that might be worthwhile. I also have some Compeed blister patches, which are really, really, really good, and they protect the skin, and I find quite useful. We already talked about nip tape. I have a few spares, just in a separate little bag like that, just in case. And finally, I also tend to carry little ginger chews. When you're out running and you're having to take nutrition at 200 calories an hour, or ideally a little bit more, sometimes you can get a little bit nauseous, and ginger's really, really good for combating that. And so I have these little chews. I buy them in packs of like half a dozen from a veggie store on Margan Ave here in West Auckland, but I'm sure you can find them elsewhere. Any kind of ginger, sweet crystallized ginger will help settle your stomach if you start to feel a little bit nauseous. On a final note that's not really relevant to me, but will be very, very relevant to women who trail run. In your care parcel, you may well think very hard about including some kind of period care product. So that could be a tampon or two, or a sanitary towel, or whatever works for you. Now, that's not something I can really talk about from personal experience for fairly obvious reasons. But if you do have questions or you need to know what to do if you get your period while you're out in the middle of a trail race or even just a normal trail run, go ask questions on the New Zealand Wild Things trail running site or your whatever Facebook or other forum you're most familiar with. And I'm pretty sure that there will be people out there who will give you some really, really solid advice from their own personal experience. We are about 11 weeks to race day. My Tarawera beard is growing very nicely, thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to getting out this afternoon and hopefully not getting too wet on my afternoon run. As ever, if you've got any questions, please feel free to stick them below in the chat. And I hope your training is going fantastically well.